Imagine standing at a gate, passport in hand, ready to board your flight home. You've done everything right, arrived early, documents in order, dreams of reuniting with your family just hours away. Now imagine watching a gate agent look you in the eye and deliberately throw your passport into the trash. Not drop it by accident, not misplace it. Throw it away. For 19-year-old Keisha Williams, this nightmare became reality at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. But what this agent didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that Keisha had recorded everything. And what happened next didn't just go viral. It sparked a federal investigation, cost careers, and forced one of America's largest airlines to face an ugly truth they'd been hiding for years. This is the story of how one young black woman's 5-minute video brought an entire corporation to its knees. Because sometimes justice doesn't wait for permission. Keisha Williams woke up at 4:30 a.m. on September 15, 2023, in her cramped college dorm room at Northwestern University. The pre-dawn darkness outside her window matched the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Today, she was flying home to Atlanta for her grandmother's 80th birthday, a celebration that had been planned for months. At 19 years old, Keisha was a sophomore studying engineering, one of only 3 black women in her entire program. She was used to being the only one in the room, used to the microaggressions, the surprised looks when she answered questions correctly, the way professors sometimes seemed to look right through her. But this weekend wasn't about that. This weekend was about family, about her grandmother's famous peach cobbler, about her little brother's bear hugs, about feeling seen and loved and home. She'd checked her flight status obsessively the night before. American Airlines Flight 2847, departing O'Hare at 9:45 a.m. She'd printed her boarding pass, charged her phone to 100%, and triple-checked her documents. Her passport, relatively new, obtained just 8 months earlier for a spring break trip to Mexico, sat in the front pocket of her backpack, pristine and ready. Keisha arrived at O'Hare at 7:15 a.m., giving herself plenty of time. She learned early that being black meant always being twice as prepared, twice as punctual, twice as careful. Her mother had taught her that. "Baby," she'd say, "the world doesn't give us the benefit of the doubt, so we don't give them reasons." The TSA checkpoint went smoothly. The security officer barely glanced at her passport before waving her through. She bought an overpriced coffee and a breakfast sandwich, found a seat near gate K9, and settled in to review notes for an exam the following week. The gate area gradually filled with other passengers. Keisha noticed she was one of maybe 4 black passengers in a sea of business travelers and families. Nothing unusual for an airline in America, she thought. Just another reminder of spaces she occupied where she remained conspicuously visible, yet somehow invisible at the same time. At 9:15 a.m., the gate agent began the boarding process. Her name tag read Jennifer Schultz. She was a white woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her smile bright and professional as she greeted the first-class passengers. Keisha was in Group 5, Basic Economy, the cheapest ticket she could find on her student budget. She waited patiently as Groups 1 through 4 boarded, her boarding pass and passport ready in her hand. When her group was finally called, Keisha joined the line. She was third in her group to approach the podium. She watched Jennifer scan the first 2 passengers' boarding passes with efficiency and pleasant chit-chat. "Have a great flight," she chirped to a middle-aged white couple. Then it was Keisha's turn. She stepped forward with a smile, extending her boarding pass and passport. "Good morning." Jennifer took the documents without returning the greeting. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around the eyes, a flattening of her smile. She scanned the boarding pass and the system beeped acceptance. But instead of handing back Keisha's documents, Jennifer held the passport, flipping it open. She stared at the photo page for what felt like an eternity. "This doesn't look like you," Jennifer said, her voice loud enough that nearby passengers turned to look. Keisha's heart skipped. "Excuse me? This photo, it doesn't look like you." Jennifer's tone was accusatory, final. Keisha felt heat rising to her face, that familiar prickle of humiliation and anger. "That's me. I took that photo 8 months ago." I'm going to need to verify this, Jennifer said, still holding the passport. She picked up a phone at the podium. And that's when Keisha quietly pulled out her phone and started recording. Keisha's hands trembled slightly as she angled her phone, keeping it low but positioned to capture both Jennifer and the interaction. She'd seen enough viral videos to know the importance of documentation. In America, a black person's word against a white authority figure's word meant you needed proof. Always proof. "Ma'am, that is my passport," Keisha said calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I don't understand why you need to verify it." Jennifer didn't look up from the phone she was holding to her ear. "Security protocol," she said dismissively. "Please step aside." "Protocol for what?" Keisha pressed. "You didn't verify anyone else's passport." That got Jennifer's attention. Her eyes snapped up, narrowing. "Are you refusing to comply with airline security procedures?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Keisha felt other passengers' eyes on her, could sense their judgment, their discomfort, their silent pleas for her to just be quiet and not make a scene. This was the game, Keisha realized. The game black people in America knew all too well. Stay quiet and accept mistreatment, or speak up and become the angry black woman, the difficult passenger, the problem. "I'm not refusing anything," Keisha replied, her voice measured. "I'm asking why my valid passport requires verification when no one else's did." A supervisor appeared, a tall white man in his 50s with graying temples and an American Airlines manager badge. Jennifer immediately launched into her version. "This passenger's passport photo doesn't match her appearance, and she's being uncooperative." Keisha's stomach dropped. The lie was so casual, so smooth. She hadn't been uncooperative. She'd simply asked a question. "Miss, I need you to step out of line," the supervisor said, not even looking at the passport in Jennifer's hand. "Can you look at my passport first?" Keisha asked, her phone still recording. "Can you actually compare the photo to my face and tell me it doesn't match?" The supervisor finally took the passport from Jennifer. He glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, barely enough time to actually compare the photo to Keisha standing in front of him. The photo showed her with her hair in box braids. Today she wore her natural hair in a twist out, but her face was identical. Same heart-shaped face, same brown eyes, same small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. "This could be anyone," he said, handing it back to Jennifer. Keisha felt something break inside her chest. Not sadness, not fear, rage. "That's me," she said, her voice rising, despite her attempts to stay calm. "Look at my face. Look at the photo. It's clearly me." "Miss, if you don't step aside, we'll have to call airport security," the supervisor warned. Behind Keisha, other passengers in Group 5 were getting restless. She could hear the sighs, the muttering. "Can we just board?" someone complained. "What's taking so long?" As if this was her fault. As if she'd created this situation by having the audacity to exist while black and question authority. "I'm not moving until someone actually looks at my passport and explains why it's invalid," Keisha said, planting her feet. Her phone captured everything. Jennifer's hostile expression, the supervisor's dismissive body language, the growing crowd of annoyed passengers. That's when Jennifer did something Keisha would replay in her mind 1,000 times. With deliberate, performative slowness, Jennifer walked to a trash can beside the podium. She held Keisha's passport, a federal document, the only form of identification Keisha had brought, over the opening, and she let it drop. The passport tumbled through the air in slow motion, landing with a soft thud among coffee cups, boarding pass stubs, and crumpled napkins. The gate area went silent. Jennifer turned back to Keisha with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oops," she said. "I guess you'll need to retrieve that, but you'll have to get back in line after. We're boarding now." The supervisor said nothing, did nothing, just stood there, complicit in his silence. And Keisha's phone caught it all. Time seemed to fracture. Keisha stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. A gate agent, a representative of a major American airline, had just thrown her passport in the trash. Not accidentally, not carelessly, deliberately. The other passengers stared. Some looked uncomfortable, averting their eyes. Others looked annoyed, as if Keisha was the problem, the obstacle between them and their destination. One man in a business suit checked his watch ostentatiously and huffed. Keisha felt that familiar sensation, the one every black person in America knows intimately. That moment when you realize the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. Just not for you. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, words spoken over Sunday dinners and during long phone calls. Baby girl, they want you to get angry. They want you to yell and scream so they can call security and prove you're everything they already think you are. Don't give them that. Be smarter than their hate. Keisha took a breath, then another. She kept her phone steady, still recording. You just threw my passport in the trash, she said, her voice eerily calm. A federal document. You threw it in the trash. Jennifer had already turned back to the podium, scanning the next passenger's boarding pass as if nothing had happened. Next in line, please. The supervisor had disappeared into the jetway, washing his hands of the situation entirely. Keisha walked to the trash can. The smell of stale coffee and discarded food hit her as she looked down into the bin. Her passport lay there, her own face staring back up at her from the photo page, nestled between a half-eaten bagel and someone's used tissues. She reached in, trying not to think about the germs, the humiliation, the degradation of this moment. Her fingers closed around the passport, and she pulled it out, brushing off a streak of what looked like cream cheese. Around her, passengers continued boarding as if this was normal, as if watching a young black woman fish her legal documents out of the trash was just another Tuesday morning at O'Hare. Keisha's hands shook as she wiped the passport on her jeans, but her mind was crystallizing into sharp focus. She thought about her mother, who'd been followed around department stores her entire life. Her father, who'd been pulled over 47 times in his life, 47 times, for matching a description. Her older cousin Marcus, who'd been rejected from 12 apartments in white neighborhoods, despite having perfect credit and a six-figure salary. She thought about sitting in predominantly white classrooms where professors called on her only when discussing affirmative action, about walking through campus and watching white women clutch their purses tighter, about the statistics she'd learned in her sociology elective. Black passengers were 2.5 times more likely to be stopped by TSA, more likely to be removed from flights, more likely to face random additional screening. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was pattern. This was policy. This was America. Keisha looked at her phone, still recording. She'd captured everything: the accusation, the dismissal, the disposal of her passport, the casual cruelty of it all. 5 minutes that encapsulated centuries of being treated as less than, as suspicious, as unworthy of basic dignity. She had a choice to make. She could file a complaint through proper channels, a complaint that would likely be buried, ignored, or met with a form letter apology. She could call a lawyer, start a legal process that would take years and cost money she didn't have. She could swallow this humiliation, retrieve her passport, get back in line, and try to make it to her grandmother's birthday. Or she could do something different. Keisha walked away from the gate, not toward the jetway to board. Away. She found a quiet corner near a closed Hudson news shop and pulled up her social media accounts. Her hands moved quickly, uploading the video to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok simultaneously. She typed a caption, "This is what flying while black looks like in 2023. At American Air gate agent threw my valid passport in the trash because she said it doesn't look like me. Caught everything on camera. Watch till the end. #flying while black #American Airlines." Her finger hovered over the post button for just a moment. Then she pressed it. Keisha hit post at 9:47 a.m. Central Time. For the first 60 seconds, nothing happened. The video sat there with 0 views, 0 likes, 0 shares. Just another voice screaming into the void of social media. She watched her screen, her heart pounding, suddenly second-guessing everything. What if no one cared? What if people blamed her? What if American Airlines came after her legally? What if this ruined her chances at internships, at graduate school, at a normal life? But then the numbers started moving. 10 views, 50 views, 200 views. Her phone began buzzing with notifications. Comments flooded in. This is disgusting. I'm never flying American again. This happened to my sister in Dallas. Same airline. That smirk on the agent's face. She knew what she was doing. Within 10 minutes, the video had 5,000 views. Within 20 minutes, 50,000. The algorithm was picking it up, pushing it to more feeds, more eyes, more people who'd experienced their own versions of this humiliation. Keisha's follower count started climbing. She'd had maybe 800 followers before, mostly friends, classmates, a few people from her hometown. Now strangers were following her by the thousands, hundreds per minute. The comments kept coming, a river of validation and shared pain. I'm a black pilot, and I've been asked to show additional credentials while in uniform. In uniform? They did this to my mom at LaGuardia, made her miss her flight. She was going to her father's funeral. White woman here, I've never been asked to verify my passport, not once. This is racism, plain and simple. But there were other comments too, the ones Keisha had been dreading. Maybe if she wasn't being difficult. We don't know what happened before the video started. Playing the race card again. If she had nothing to hide, why did she refuse to step aside? The comments twisted the narrative, rewriting reality even as video evidence played in crystal clarity. Jennifer throwing the passport in the trash became accidentally dropped. Keisha's calm questioning became aggressive confrontation. The fact that no white passengers had their passports scrutinized was conveniently ignored. This was the tax of being black in America. Even your documented truth would be questioned, dissected, and dismissed. But something was different this time. The supportive comments outnumbered the racist ones 10 to 1. People were tagging major news outlets, civil rights organizations, celebrities. The hashtag #JusticeForKeisha started trending. At 10:15 a.m., just 28 minutes after posting, Keisha got her first media inquiry. A reporter from a Chicago local news station sent her a direct message. We'd like to interview you about what happened. Can you call me? Then another and another. ABC News, NBC Chicago, the Chicago Tribune, BET, The Root. By 10:30 a.m., her inbox was flooded with interview requests. Her phone rang. It was her mother. Baby, what's happening? Her mother's voice was tight with worry. Your aunt just sent me your video. Are you okay? Where are you? Keisha felt tears prick her eyes for the first time that morning. Hearing her mother's voice broke through the adrenaline-fueled armor she'd built around herself. I'm okay, Mama. I'm still at the airport. I missed my flight. You're coming home, though? Tell me you're safe. I'm safe. Keisha watched her view count tick past 100,000. Mama, I think people are listening. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, your grandmother called me. She saw it too. Someone from church shared it. Baby, she says she's proud of you. Says you did what she never could. You fought back with truth. Keisha's eyes burned. She'd missed the flight. She wasn't going to make it to the birthday party on time. But maybe, just maybe, she was doing something more important. I need to go, Mama. Reporters want to talk to me. You call a lawyer first, her mother said firmly. Don't talk to anyone until you have legal protection. I'm serious, Keisha. These people have money and power. You need someone in your corner. Yes, ma'am. As they hung up, Keisha noticed a new notification. A verified account had shared her video. Shaun King, the civil rights activist, with his 1.2 million followers. His caption read, "This is state-sanctioned dehumanization. And American Air needs to answer for this today." The view count hit 500,000. The firestorm had begun. By noon, Keisha's video had been viewed 2.3 million times. It was the #1 trending topic on Twitter in the United States. #boycott American Airlines was trending alongside #JusticeForKeisha. The video had jumped from social media to mainstream news cycles with the speed of wildfire in a drought. Inside American Airlines corporate headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, executives were in full crisis mode. The company's social media team had been bombarded with thousands upon thousands of angry messages. Their official Twitter account couldn't post anything, literally anything, without being flooded with responses containing Keisha's video. They tweeted about a partnership with a children's charity at 11 a.m., and within minutes, every single reply was, "How about you stop hiring racist gate agents?" The airline stock had dipped 1.2% in morning trading. Not catastrophic, but enough to get the attention of the board of directors. In the airline industry, where margins were razor thin and reputation was everything, a viral scandal could cost millions in lost bookings within days. The PR team drafted their first response at 11:30 a.m. It was the standard corporate non-apology, carefully crafted by lawyers. American Airlines is committed to providing excellent service to all customers. We are aware of a video circulating on social media and are investigating the matter. We take all customer concerns seriously. They posted it at 11:47 a.m. The response was immediate and brutal. Investigating the matter? We can all see the video. There's nothing to investigate. This is pathetic. Fire her. Now. All customer concerns seriously, except when they're black, apparently. I've been platinum status for 15 years. Just canceled my credit card. Done with this airline. The tweet got ratioed so badly, more than 50,000 replies to just 3,000 likes, that the social media team deleted it within an hour. But screenshots live forever. Deleting it only made things worse. They deleted their weak apology. They know they're guilty. American Airlines trying to cover their tracks. The internet doesn't forget. Meanwhile, journalists were doing what Keisha couldn't do alone. They were digging. A reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times made a public records request for complaints filed against Jennifer Schultz. Another journalist at ProPublica started investigating patterns of discrimination complaints against American Airlines at O'Hare specifically. By 1 p.m., the Chicago Sun-Times had published a bombshell. Jennifer Schultz had been the subject of 17 formal complaints in her 8 years with American Airlines. 17. Complaints ranging from rude behavior to discriminatory treatment to one particularly damning incident where she'd called security on a black passenger who'd asked to speak to a supervisor about a seating issue. All 17 complaints had been investigated internally. All 17 had resulted in no disciplinary action beyond additional training. The article included a quote from a former American Airlines employee who'd worked with Schultz. Everyone knew Jennifer had issues with black passengers. It was an open secret. Management didn't care as long as she kept her numbers up. The story exploded across social media. It wasn't just one bad day. It wasn't just one bad interaction. It was a pattern. A system that protected racist behavior, that prioritized avoiding lawsuits over protecting passengers' dignity. More people came forward. A black businessman tweeted about being removed from an American Airlines flight in 2021 after a white passenger complained he looked suspicious for writing in Arabic. He'd been writing in his engineering notebook, equations. A black mother shared her story of being accused of trafficking her own light-skinned daughter and detained for 2 hours while they verified her relationship. A black doctor posted about being told she couldn't sit in first class because she didn't look like she could afford that ticket. She was wearing scrubs after a 14-hour shift. The stories painted a devastating picture. This wasn't about one racist gate agent. This was about a culture that enabled, protected, and perpetuated racist treatment of black passengers across the entire airline system. By 2 p.m., prominent civil rights organizations had released statements. The NAACP issued a travel advisory warning black passengers about flying American Airlines. The National Action Network, led by Reverend Al Sharpton, announced they would be organizing protests at major American Airlines hubs. Celebrity allies joined the chorus. Ava DuVernay tweeted, "Brianna, Sandra, Rakia, Ayana, now Keisha. When will we be allowed to exist without proving we deserve basic human dignity?" Actress Lupita Nyong'o shared the video. This is what systemic racism looks like. A black girl's passport thrown in the trash like her humanity means nothing. LeBron James posted on Instagram, This could be my daughter. This could be any of our daughters. This has to stop. At American Air, the world is watching. Each share brought millions more eyes to Keisha's video. The view count climbed past 8 million. And inside American Airlines headquarters, executives realized with dawning horror that a standard PR playbook wasn't going to work. This wasn't going away. This was going to require real action, real accountability, real change. Or at least the appearance of it. At 3:47 p.m. Central Time, exactly 6 hours after Keisha posted her video, American Airlines CEO Robert Isom appeared in a hastily arranged video statement. He looked tired, his tie slightly loosened, his expression grave. The PR team had fought for this moment, knowing that silence was no longer an option. I want to address the incident that occurred this morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Isom began, his voice measured. After reviewing the video footage and conducting a preliminary investigation, I can say unequivocally that what happened to Miss Keisha Williams is unacceptable and does not represent the values of American Airlines. He paused, clearly reading from a teleprompter, each word vetted by lawyers. Effective immediately, the employee involved has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We have reached out to Miss Williams to apologize directly and offer compensation for her missed flight and any distress caused. The corporate speak hung in the air like smoke. American Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. We are committed to ensuring that all passengers, regardless of race, are treated with dignity and respect. We will be conducting a comprehensive review of our policies and procedures to ensure this never happens again. The video ended. It was posted across all American Airlines social media platforms simultaneously. The response was swift and merciless. Administrative leave is not accountability. Fire her. Offer compensation? You think money fixes racism? Zero tolerance? She had 17 complaints. Where was the zero tolerance? This is damage control, not justice. But Keisha wasn't focused on the CEO's statement. She was sitting in a conference room at a law office in downtown Chicago, meeting with attorneys who'd reached out to her within hours of the video going viral. The lead attorney, a black woman named Simone Harris, with 3 decades of civil rights litigation experience, sat across from Keisha with a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Here's what we're looking at, Simone said, her voice kind but direct. We can file a civil rights lawsuit under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. We can sue for emotional distress, discrimination, in violation of your constitutional rights. Based on the video evidence and the pattern of complaints against this employee, we have an extremely strong case. Keisha nodded, still processing the surreality of the day. This morning she'd been a college student worried about making her flight. Now she was sitting with lawyers discussing federal civil rights litigation. But I want you to understand something, Simone continued, leaning forward. This is going to get harder before it gets better. American Airlines has unlimited resources. They'll try to paint you as opportunistic, as someone seeking attention or money. They'll dig into your past, your social media, your grades, your relationships, anything they can use to discredit you. I know, Keisha said quietly. She'd already seen the hateful messages, the people calling her a liar despite video evidence, the racist trolls flooding her mentions with slurs and threats. They'll offer you a settlement, Simone said, probably a substantial one. 6 figures, maybe more, in exchange for your silence. A non-disclosure agreement that prevents you from ever talking about this again. Keisha met her eyes. And if I don't take it, then we fight. We take this to trial if necessary. We make them answer in open court for every complaint they ignored, every black passenger they failed, every time they chose protecting their bottom line over protecting people's civil rights. But that could take years. It will be exhausting. It will be painful. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Keisha thought about her grandmother, about Sunday dinners and stories of the segregated South, of restaurants that wouldn't serve her, of water fountains marked colored only, of the quiet dignities stolen and the loud injustices endured. She thought about Rosa Parks, who hadn't planned to start a movement. She'd just been tired of giving up her seat. About Claudette Colvin, the teenager whose story was erased because she wasn't the right face for the movement, about every black woman who'd been told to be quiet, to not make waves, to accept less than full humanity. I don't want their money, Keisha said, her voice steady. I want accountability, real accountability. Simone smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd hoped Keisha would say exactly that. Then let's make history. Outside the law office, news vans were setting up. Keisha had agreed to her first on-camera interview with ABC News. The reporter, a black woman named Jenna Norman, had promised a fair hearing, a chance to tell her story in her own words. At 5 p.m., Keisha stepped in front of the cameras. Behind her, downtown Chicago's skyline stretched toward a graying sky. She wore the same clothes from that morning, jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, her natural hair framing her face, her eyes clear and determined. Miss Williams, Jenny began, your video has now been viewed over 15 million times. The nation is watching. What do you want people to understand about what happened to you today? Well, Keisha took a breath. I want people to understand that this isn't just about me. This isn't just about one gate agent on one bad day. This is about a system that allows black people to be treated as suspects, as problems, as less than human, and then protects the people who treat us that way. Her voice didn't waver. I'm 19 years old. I'm an engineering student. I've never been in trouble. I did everything right, and I still had my passport thrown in the trash like I was garbage. Because in that moment, to that agent, that's what I was. John, I nodded, letting the words land. Hey, what do you want to see happen now? I want real change, Keisha said. Not PR statements, not diversity training that everyone sleeps through. I want policies that protect passengers. I want accountability for employees who discriminate. I want black people to be able to travel without fear, without having to record every interaction just to prove we deserve basic respect. The interview would air on World News Tonight, reaching millions more viewers. It would be shared, quoted, and dissected across every platform. But for Keisha, the most important moment came after the camera stopped rolling, when a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, approached shyly with her mother. Are you the lady from the video? The girl asked. I am, Keisha said, kneeling down to her level. My mom says you're brave, the girl said. She says you're fighting for people like us. Keisha felt tears threaten for the second time that day. Your mom's right. I'm fighting for you. So when you're old enough to travel by yourself, nobody treats you the way they treated me. The little girl smiled and hugged her. In that moment, Keisha knew, whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead, she'd made the right choice. Sometimes justice doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it starts with one person saying, enough. 48 hours after Keisha's video went viral, the Department of Transportation announced a formal investigation into American Airlines passenger treatment practices. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, delivered via press release from Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg's office. The department takes allegations of discriminatory practices in air travel extremely seriously. The statement read, "We have opened an investigation into American Airlines to examine patterns of passenger treatment, complaint resolution procedures, and employee accountability measures. Civil rights in transportation are not negotiable." It was unprecedented. While the DOT regularly investigated airlines for operational issues, delays, cancellations, baggage handling, a federal civil rights investigation into passenger discrimination was rare. The last comparable case had been in 2017, and it had resulted in a $1.6 million fine. But this felt different. The public pressure was immense. Keisha's video had been viewed over 30 million times across platforms. #boycott American Airlines was still trending 5 days later. Travel booking sites reported a measurable decline in American Airlines reservations. Some estimates put the loss at 12% in the week following the incident. The investigation would examine 5 years of complaint data, interviewing passengers who'd filed discrimination complaints, reviewing security footage from incidents, and deposing American Airlines employees about company culture and training practices. Within days, the floodgates opened. The DOT set up a dedicated hotline for passengers to report experiences with American Airlines. They received over 3,000 calls in the first 72 hours. The stories were harrowing in their consistency. A black federal judge was asked to prove she could afford her first-class ticket, twice on the same flight, by two different flight attendants. A black family of 5 was removed from a plane after a white passenger complained their children were too loud, even though multiple passengers testified the children had been sitting quietly. A black military veteran in uniform was told he needed additional screening and missed his connection while white passengers breezed through. A dark-skinned Latina woman was accused of stealing the credit card she used to purchase her ticket, her own credit card with her name on it, and was detained until police verified her identity. An elderly black couple was separated and questioned for an hour because gate agents suspected their tickets were fraudulent. They'd been flying to their grandson's graduation. Each story was a variation on the same theme: suspicion, humiliation, in a system that presumed guilt rather than innocence when the passenger was black or brown. The DOT investigators also uncovered something damning in American Airlines internal records. The airline had a metric called PASS, Passenger Assistance and Safety Screening. It was supposed to be a random security measure requiring additional verification of identification for a small percentage of passengers. Except it wasn't random. So, data analysts at the DOT discovered that black passengers were flagged for PASS screening at a rate 340% higher than white passengers. The algorithm behind PASS, supposedly neutral, had been trained on historical data that reflected decades of discriminatory practices. It had essentially automated racism, wrapping bias in the language of security and efficiency. Even more damning, American Airlines executives had been briefed on this disparity in 2021. An internal diversity and inclusion report had flagged the PASS system as potentially discriminatory and recommended an audit. The audit never happened. The report was filed away. Business continued as usual. When this information leaked to the press, and leaks were inevitable once federal investigators got involved, it became a national scandal. This isn't just about Jennifer Schultz throwing a passport in the trash. This was about institutional racism embedded in the very software that determined how passengers were treated. Computer scientists and civil rights advocates pointed out what should have been obvious. Algorithms weren't neutral. They reflected the biases of their creators in the data they were trained on. When that data contained centuries of racist assumptions about who was suspicious or dangerous, the algorithm simply perpetuated those assumptions at scale. American Airlines automated discrimination, wrote a columnist at The Atlantic. They created a system that could mistreat thousands of black passengers while maintaining plausible deniability. No single person had to be racist. The algorithm did it for them. The airline stock continued to fall. Major corporate clients began reviewing their travel contracts. Delta and United, American's competitors, saw booking increases as passengers switched carriers. Though civil rights advocates warned that those airlines likely had similar issues yet to be exposed. On Capitol Hill, senators from both parties called for hearings. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, one of only 3 black senators, gave an impassioned speech on the Senate floor. "We're told to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps," he said, his voice rising with emotion. "We're told if we work hard, get educated, follow the rules, we'll be treated equally. And yet a 19-year-old college student with a valid passport gets treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin. When does it end? How many videos do we have to watch? How many black people have to document their own dehumanization before we admit this is a systemic problem?" The speech went viral, not as viral as Keisha's original video, but viral enough. It was shared by news outlets, played on cable news on loop, cited by activists organizing protests. American Airlines was hemorrhaging public trust, and the federal government was closing in. But the real battle was just beginning. Because Keisha wasn't interested in symbolic victories or corporate apologies. She wanted structural change, and her legal team was preparing to force exactly that. On October 2nd, 2023, exactly 17 days after the incident, Keisha Williams filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against American Airlines in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. But this wasn't a typical lawsuit seeking damages for one individual. Simone Harris and her legal team had spent those 17 days building something far more ambitious, a class action lawsuit representing thousands of black passengers who'd experienced discrimination by American Airlines over the previous decade. The complaint was 127 pages long. It detailed not just Keisha's experience, but a pattern and practice of discrimination that spanned years, airports, and countless incidents. It named 14 additional plaintiffs, real people with real stories, each one devastating in its specificity. There was Marcus Johnson, a 42-year-old investment banker who'd been removed from 3 different American Airlines flights over 5 years, always for reasons like acting suspicious or making other passengers uncomfortable. His crime? Being a tall black man who asked for what he paid for. Quote, there was Keisha Williams, a biracial woman who'd been told she didn't match her ticket, which was under her married name, and was accused of using someone else's reservation. She'd shown her driver's license, her credit card, and her marriage certificate. They still made her miss her flight. Quote, there was Reverend David Thompson, a 68-year-old pastor who'd been flying American for 30 years. He described being passed over for pre-boarding assistance 3 times while visibly using a cane, only to watch white passengers board first. When he asked a gate agent about it, he was told he didn't look like he really needed help. There was Jasmine Rodriguez, a 25-year-old medical resident who'd been accused of stealing earbuds from the first-class cabin, her own earbuds in her own ears, because a flight attendant didn't think she could afford AirPods Pro. 14 stories, 14 humiliations, 14 examples of how American Airlines treated black passengers as inherently suspect, inherently less deserving, inherently other. The lawsuit demanded 3 things. First, compensatory damages for each plaintiff, not just for missed flights or lost luggage, but for emotional distress, for the psychological toll of being treated as criminals in public spaces, for the trauma of constantly having to prove your humanity. Second, punitive damages against American Airlines as a corporation. The legal team was seeking $200 million, enough to hurt, enough to send a message to every airline in America that discrimination had real financial consequences. Third, and most importantly, a consent decree requiring American Airlines to implement sweeping structural changes. The lawsuit demanded immediate termination of the pass algorithm and any similar screening systems that disproportionately targeted passengers of color, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees, designed and overseen by independent civil rights organizations, not corporate HR departments, creation of an independent passenger advocacy board with power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action, public quarterly reports on passenger complaints disaggregated by race with transparent accountability measures, a $50 million fund for compensation to passengers who'd filed discrimination complaints over the past decade that were dismissed or ignored. It was ambitious. It was aggressive. It was exactly what was needed. American Airlines' legal team responded within a week with a motion to dismiss, arguing that the plaintiffs hadn't exhausted administrative remedies, that the class wasn't properly certified, that the demands were overly broad and would require judicial oversight of business operations. The usual legal stonewalling. But Judge Patricia Morrison, a black woman appointed to the federal bench in 2019, wasn't having it. In a strongly worded ruling denying the motion to dismiss, she wrote, "The allegations in this complaint, supported by video evidence and statistical analysis, describe a pattern of conduct that, if proven, represents a fundamental violation of civil rights protections in public accommodation. This court will not dismiss claims of systemic discrimination on procedural grounds when the underlying conduct strikes it at the heart of equal protection under law." The lawsuit would proceed. News of the ruling spread quickly. It meant discovery, the legal process where Keisha's attorneys could demand internal documents, emails, training materials, complaint records, everything. American Airlines would have to open its books and expose its internal culture to scrutiny. Corporate defendants hated discovery. It was where secrets came out, where carefully crafted public images collided with ugly internal realities. And the reality at American Airlines was uglier than anyone had imagined. During discovery, Keisha's legal team uncovered emails that made headlines. A 2020 email chain between regional managers discussing problem passengers included phrases like, "You know the type," and "These people always complain," in reference to black passengers who'd filed grievances. One manager had written, "Just document everything so when they play the race card, we have CYA, CYA, cover your ass." They'd known. They'd anticipated accusations of racism and had created paper trails to defend against them, rather than actually addressing the discrimination. Tone. Another discovery. American Airlines had hired a consulting firm in 2019 to assess their diversity and inclusion practices. The firm's report, marked confidential attorney-client privilege, had identified serious problems with how black passengers were treated. It had made specific recommendations for reform. One, American Airlines had paid $400,000 for that report, then buried it. The consulting firm had recommended eliminating the pass algorithm. American Airlines had ignored the recommendation. The firm had suggested independent oversight of discrimination complaints. American Airlines had rejected it as operationally impractical. The firm had warned that without changes, the airline was vulnerable to exactly the kind of lawsuit they were now facing. American Airlines had apparently decided the risk was worth it. Every revelation made headlines. Every internal document that surfaced showed a company that had chosen profit over people, reputation management over real accountability. Public pressure intensified. Protests expanded from major hubs to smaller airports. Flight attendants, including many black employees of American Airlines, began speaking out about the racism they'd witnessed and experienced themselves. A group of American Airlines black flight attendants held a press conference in Dallas, describing a culture where they were routinely assigned to less desirable routes, passed over for promotions, and punished more harshly than white colleagues for minor infractions. "We're not just fighting for passengers," said Nicole Baptiste, a flight attendant with 15 years at American. "We're fighting for ourselves. This company has a race problem from top to bottom, and it's time to say it out loud." The cracks in American Airlines' facade were becoming chasms. And Keisha, the 19-year-old engineering student who just wanted to make it to her grandmother's birthday, was at the center of a movement that was forcing America to confront an uncomfortable truth. Racism wasn't just about individual bad actors. It was about institutions that enabled, protected, and profited from discriminatory practices while claiming to value diversity. It was about systems designed to maintain hierarchies while using the language of equality. It was about corporations that would rather fight lawsuits than fix problems. But this time, people weren't looking away. This time, there were receipts. This time, there was video evidence, statistical proof, and a young black woman who refused to be silenced. The trial was scheduled for March 2024. Both sides spent months preparing. American Airlines assembling a legal team of 30 attorneys from 3 different white shoe law firms. Keisha's team working around the clock to prepare testimony from hundreds of witnesses. But trials are unpredictable, and American Airlines knew they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. Every day of trial would mean more headlines, more internal documents becoming public, more employees testifying about the culture of discrimination, more passengers sharing their stories on national television. Their crisis management team ran the numbers. A prolonged trial could cost them billions in lost revenue, not millions. Major corporate contracts were already in jeopardy. 3 Fortune 500 companies had publicly announced that they were reviewing their travel partnerships. Delta had launched an advertising campaign subtly positioning themselves as the airline that respects all passengers, a direct shot at American. In February 2024, American Airlines requested a settlement conference. Judge Morrison appointed a federal mediator, and both sides entered negotiations. The sessions were brutal, lasting 12 and 14 hours at a time. American's attorneys tried every tactic: lowball offers, threats of protracted litigation, attempts to separate Keisha from the class action, by offering her a substantial individual settlement. Keisha turned down $2.5 million, then $4 million, then $6 million. This isn't about me getting paid, she told Simone during a break in negotiations. If I take their money and walk away, nothing changes. The next black girl, the next black family, they'll go through the same thing. Simone smiled. At 73 years old, having spent her entire career fighting civil rights battles, she'd seen too many plaintiffs lose their nerve when large sums of money appeared. But Keisha was different. Then let's get them to pay for real change, Simone said. The final settlement, announced on March 8, 2024, 6 months after Keisha's video went viral, was unprecedented in the airline industry's history. American Airlines agreed to $185 million in total payments, $85 million to the class action members. Thousands of black passengers who'd filed discrimination complaints over the past decade would receive compensation ranging from $5,000 to $50,000, depending on the severity of their experience. Another $75 million would go to a civil rights fund administered by the NAACP and other organizations to combat discrimination in travel. $25 million would fund scholarships for black students pursuing careers in aviation, hospitality, and transportation. Complete elimination of the pass algorithm and any automated screening systems. All passenger screening would be truly random, audited quarterly by independent civil rights monitors. Creation of a passenger civil rights office, an independent entity within American Airlines, staffed by civil rights professionals not employed by the airline, with power to investigate complaints, recommend terminations, and report directly to the board of directors, not to the CEO or executive team. Mandatory bias training, not the typical one-day diversity seminar, but a comprehensive 6-month program designed by the Equal Justice Initiative with annual refresher courses. Employees who failed the training or violated civil rights policies would face immediate termination. No exceptions. Public transparency. American Airlines would publish quarterly reports breaking down complaints by race, response times, disciplinary actions taken, and outcomes. No more burying problems. No more internal investigations that led nowhere. Personal accountability. Jennifer Schultz was terminated and would never work in the airline industry again. American Airlines used their industry connections to ensure she was flagged in hiring systems. The supervisor who'd stood by during the passport incident was also terminated. 3 regional managers who'd ignored complaint patterns were demoted. And there was one more component, the one that Keisha had insisted on. Keisha's law. American Airlines agreed to support federal legislation requiring all airlines to implement similar protections, creating industry-wide standards for passenger civil rights. They would testify before Congress in support of the bill and use their lobbying power to push for its passage. It was named after Keisha, but it would protect millions. The settlement press conference was held at the Dirksen Federal Building in Chicago. Keisha stood at a podium, flanked by her legal team, her parents, and representatives from civil rights organizations. She was no longer the nervous 19-year-old from that September morning. 6 months of legal battles, media scrutiny, death threats from racists, and pressure from all sides had forged her into something stronger. When I posted that video, Keisha said, her voice clear and steady, I didn't know what would happen. I just knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let one more black person be treated as less than human without consequences. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. This settlement isn't just about money. It's about accountability. It's about saying that our dignity isn't negotiable, that our humanity isn't up for debate, that we deserve to move through this world without constantly having to prove we belong. She paused, emotion flickering across her face. I think about all the people who came before me, people who experienced the same discrimination but didn't have smartphones to record it, people who complained and were ignored, people who were so tired of fighting that they just accepted mistreatment as the price of being black in America. This is for them. This is for my grandmother, who remembers whites-only water fountains. This is for my mother, who's been followed in stores her whole life. This is for my little brother, so maybe he'll grow up in a world that's just a little bit more fair." Her voice strengthened. "And this is for every black person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. We belong, we've always belonged, and we're done asking permission to be treated with basic human dignity." The room erupted in applause. That evening, the settlement was the lead story on every major news network. CNN ran a special segment, "How One Video Changed an Industry." The New York Times front page headline read, "American Airlines settles landmark discrimination case, agrees to sweeping reforms." But the most meaningful moment came 3 days later. Keisha finally made it home to Atlanta, flying Delta this time, for a belated celebration with her grandmother. The birthday party from September had long passed, but her grandmother had insisted on waiting to celebrate until Keisha could be there. In her grandmother's small living room, surrounded by family and friends, the old woman pulled Keisha close. "Baby girl," she said, her eyes shining with tears, "I spent 70 years being told to keep my head down, to not make trouble, to accept things as they were. You spent 6 months tearing down walls I thought would stand forever." She cupped Keisha's face in her weathered hands. "You did what I couldn't, what your mama couldn't. You fought back, and you won. Not just for yourself, for all of us." Keisha hugged her grandmother tight, breathing in the familiar scent of cocoa butter and lavender, feeling the weight of generations of struggle and survival in that embrace. Outside, a police car slowly drove past, its presence a reminder that the fight wasn't over. Systemic racism wouldn't end with one lawsuit, one settlement, one viral video. But something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the facade, and through that crack, light was beginning to shine. Within weeks of the American Airlines settlement, the airline industry began a reckoning it had avoided for decades. United Airlines announced a comprehensive review of its passenger treatment policies. Delta launched a Civil Rights in Aviation task force. Southwest quietly eliminated several internal screening protocols that had disproportionately flagged passengers of color. None of them wanted to be the next American Airlines. None of them wanted their own Jennifer Schultz moment captured on video and viewed by 50 million people. But the changes went deeper than corporate PR campaigns. In April 2024, Representatives Ayanna Pressley and Colin Allred introduced H.R. 8472, formally titled the Passenger Civil Rights Protection Act, but known universally as Keisha's Law. The bill was comprehensive, drawing directly from the American Airlines settlement. It required all airlines to maintain independent civil rights offices with investigative power, quarterly public reporting of discrimination complaints disaggregated by race, gender, and disability status, federal penalties for airlines with patterns of discriminatory conduct, fines starting at $10 million per violation, a federal database of terminated employees fired for discrimination, preventing them from simply moving to another airline, mandatory body cameras for gate agents and flight attendants during passenger disputes, with footage preserved for complaint investigations. The airline industry lobbied against it, of course. Airlines for America, the industry trade group, called it regulatory overreach and operationally burdensome. They warned of increased ticket prices, reduced routes, jobs lost. The same arguments corporations always made when asked to treat people fairly. But something was different this time. Public opinion had shifted. Keisha's video and the thousands of stories that followed had made the invisible visible. White Americans who'd never experienced discrimination in travel couldn't unsee what they'd witnessed. The evidence was too stark, too documented, too undeniable. A Washington Post poll in May 2024 showed that 73% of Americans supported Keisha's Law, including 64% of Republicans. When asked if they believed airlines discriminated against black passengers, 81% said yes. The numbers were damning, and politicians noticed. Keisha testified before Congress in June 2024. She sat at a table in the House Transportation Committee hearing room, a space where corporate executives and lobbyists usually held sway. Now, a 20-year-old college student, who just finished her junior year, commanded the room. "Members of the committee," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves. "6 months ago, I was just a student trying to get home to my grandmother's birthday. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, but I also never imagined that in 2024, I'd have my passport thrown in the trash because of the color of my skin." She paused, making eye contact with committee members. "Some people say this bill goes too far. They say it's too expensive, too complicated, too much bureaucracy. I want you to think about what that really means. They're saying that protecting civil rights is too expensive, that treating black passengers like human beings is too complicated, that accountability is too much bureaucracy." Her voice grew stronger. "How much is my dignity worth? How much is my grandmother's worth? How much is it worth to ensure that black children can travel without their parents having to give them the talk? Not about police encounters, but about airline encounters. The talk about how to act if a gate agent questions your ticket, how to stay calm if you're accused of stealing your own luggage, how to document everything because no one will believe you otherwise." Representative Presley, who'd been watching intently, nodded. "The airline industry made $47 billion in profit last year," Keisha continued. $47 billion. They can afford to treat passengers with dignity. They just chose not to because there were no consequences. This bill creates consequences. This bill says that in America, civil rights aren't optional. The testimony was powerful, but what happened next sealed the bill's fate. During the question period, Representative Jeff Duncan, a Republican from South Carolina, known for his conservative voting record, spoke up. "Ms. Williams, I'll be honest. I came into this hearing skeptical. I generally believe in less regulation, not more. But I watched your video. I watched it with my daughter, who's 16. And she asked me a question I couldn't answer." He paused, emotion evident in his voice. "She asked me, 'Dad, why did that lady throw her passport away?' And I didn't have a good answer. Because there is no good answer. What happened to you was wrong. It was un-American. And if this bill prevents it from happening to someone else, then I don't care what the industry lobbyists say. I'm voting yes." The room went silent. A Republican from South Carolina, from a district that had voted for Trump by 20 points, had just committed to supporting civil rights legislation over corporate interests. It was a watershed moment. The hearing went viral, not as viral as Keisha's original video, but viral enough. Clips of her testimony and Representative Duncan's response circulated across social media. Conservative commentators who'd initially dismissed the American Airlines incident as playing the race card suddenly found themselves defending Duncan's position. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't about woke politics or cancel culture, the usual dismissive frames. This was about a young woman being treated unjustly, caught on camera, demanding accountability. It was a story that transcended political polarization because the injustice was too clear to deny. In July 2024, Keisha's law passed the House of Representatives 347-88. In August, it passed the Senate 76-24. On September 15, 2024, exactly 1 year after Keisha's video, President Biden signed it into law in a ceremony at the White House. Keisha stood behind the president as he signed, surrounded by civil rights leaders, members of Congress, and her family. Her grandmother, now 81, sat in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, tears streaming down her face. "This law bears your name," President Biden said, turning to Keisha after signing, "but it carries the hopes of millions. Every black traveler who's been made to feel unwelcome, every family that's been separated and interrogated, every person who's been treated as suspect simply for existing. This is for all of them." He handed Keisha the signing pen. "You changed the world," he said quietly. "At 19 years old, you changed the world." But Keisha knew the truth was more complicated. She hadn't changed the world alone. She'd stood on the shoulders of every civil rights activist who came before her. She'd been supported by lawyers who worked for reduced fees, by journalists who investigated rather than just reported, by ordinary people who'd shared her video and said, "This is wrong." Change didn't come from individuals. It came from movements. And this movement was just beginning. Because while Keisha's law addressed airline discrimination, it had opened a broader conversation about how Black Americans were treated in all public spaces: restaurants, stores, schools, hospitals, banks. If algorithms could automate racism in air travel, where else were they doing it? In loan applications, hiring decisions, criminal justice risk assessments, healthcare triage systems. The questions multiplied, and people were finally paying attention. Keisha's video had been the spark, but the fire was spreading. What the headlines didn't show, what the triumphant press conferences and legislative victories obscured, was the toll it all took on Keisha Williams. By the time Keisha's law was signed, she'd lost 20 pounds. She wasn't sleeping more than 4 hours a night. Her grades had slipped from a 3.8 GPA to a 3.2. She'd withdrawn from 2 classes to manage the demands of the lawsuit, the media interviews, the constant travel between Chicago and Washington. Her face was everywhere. Strangers recognized her at the grocery store, on campus, at the gym. Some wanted to thank her, to tell her their own stories, to cry on her shoulder. Others wanted to debate her, to tell her she was making everything about race, to accuse her of ruining someone's career over nothing. The hate mail was relentless. Her university email was flooded with racist slurs and death threats. Her Instagram DMs were a cesspool of vitriol. Someone had created a website dedicated to exposing her, digging up photos from high school parties, mischaracterizing old social media posts, trying to paint her as undeserving of sympathy. A white supremacist podcast had doxed her, publishing her dorm address and class schedule. The university had to assign her a security escort. She couldn't walk to class alone anymore. The stress fractured relationships. Her roommate, a white girl named Emily, who'd been friendly before all this, requested a room transfer. She claimed it was because of the constant disruption, the reporters showing up, the security presence, the attention. But Keisha knew the truth. Emily was uncomfortable with the reality of racism, uncomfortable being adjacent to someone who refused to stay quiet about it. Some of her white classmates stopped talking to her. Not overtly, they didn't say anything cruel or obvious. They just faded. Study groups she'd been part of suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Group project partners found other teams. She'd become inconvenient, a reminder of uncomfortable truths they'd rather not face. Even some black students kept their distance. "You're doing too much," one girl told her at a campus event. "Not all of us want to be activists. Some of us just want to live our lives without everything being about race." The comment stung more than the hate mail. The idea that wanting basic dignity was doing too much, that demanding accountability was somehow divisive. But the hardest part was the guilt. Jennifer Schultz had been fired. Her life had imploded publicly. She'd been photographed leaving the American Airlines office carrying a box of her belongings, had become the face of racism in the airline industry, had reportedly struggled to find any employment afterward. Keisha didn't feel sorry for her, but she did feel the weight of having been the catalyst for someone's complete downfall. Late at night, when anxiety kept her awake, she wondered, was she responsible for that? Should she feel guilty? Her therapist, a black woman named Dr. Michaela Jones, who specialized in racial trauma, helped her work through it. "You're not responsible for her choices," Dr. Jones said during one session. "You didn't throw that passport. You didn't create a culture of discrimination. You didn't ignore 17 complaints. You simply documented what happened and refused to stay silent. Those are not the same things." "But her life is ruined," Keisha said, tears streaming down her face. "Her kids probably—" "And how many lives did she contribute to damaging?" Dr. Jones interrupted gently. "How many black passengers felt humiliated, dehumanized, unsafe because of her actions? How many children watched their parents be disrespected and learn that's just how the world works? Jennifer Schultz's choices had consequences. That's not your fault. That's accountability." Keisha nodded, but the guilt lingered, because she wasn't a monster who celebrated someone's suffering. She was a young woman who'd wanted justice, not vengeance. Her family tried to protect her, but they were struggling too. Her mother fielded calls from distant relatives asking for money, assuming the settlement had made Keisha wealthy. It hadn't. Her portion, after legal fees and taxes, was substantial but not life-changing. Certainly not enough to support extended family members who suddenly appeared with sob stories and demands. Her father dealt with harassment at his job, Co-workers who'd been friendly suddenly made comments about playing the victim and race baiting. His boss, a white man in his 60s, had called him into the office to suggest his daughter tone down the rhetoric because it was creating division. Her father had quit the next day. At 53, with a mortgage and 2 kids still at home, he'd walked away from a job he'd held for 15 years because he wouldn't tell his daughter to be silent. The sacrifice was enormous, and Keisha felt it. Her younger brother Marcus, 14 years old, got into fights at school defending her. Kids whose parents watched Fox News called her a race hustler. Marcus, protective and angry, responded with his fists. He'd been suspended twice. The weight of it all, the cost her family was paying for her decision to speak up, sometimes felt unbearable. "Maybe I should have just taken the first settlement offer," she told her grandmother during one particularly dark moment. "Maybe I should have taken the money and stayed quiet. Then none of you would be going through this." Her grandmother, sitting in her favorite armchair with a quilt across her lap, shook her head slowly. "Baby, you know what I regret most in my 71 years of life?" she asked. Keisha shook her head. "Every time I stayed quiet, every time I let someone disrespect me because I was afraid of making waves, every time I accepted less than I deserved because fighting seemed too hard, too costly, too dangerous." Her grandmother's eyes grew distant, remembering. "I was your age when I got spit on for trying to eat at a whites-only lunch counter in Montgomery. I didn't fight back. I went home, and I've regretted it every single day since. Not because fighting back would have changed anything in that moment. It probably wouldn't have. But because my silence was their permission." She reached for Keisha's hand. "You didn't stay silent. You fought back. And yes, it's costly. Justice always is. But don't you dare feel guilty for that. The people who should feel guilty are the ones who created a system so broken that a 19-year-old girl had to fight this hard to be treated like a human being." Keisha collapsed into her grandmother's arms, sobbing, all the fear, the exhaustion, the pressure finally breaking through. "I'm so tired, Grandma," she whispered. "I know, baby. I know." They sat like that for a long time, 3 generations of Black womanhood in one embrace. The grandmother who'd survived Jim Crow, the granddaughter who'd challenged corporate Jim Crow, both carrying the weight of refusing to accept injustice. Outside, the world continued spinning. The news cycle moved on to other stories. Politicians congratulated themselves on passing Keisha's law. American Airlines stock recovered. Life returned to normal for everyone except the people who'd lived through the trauma. But in that moment, in her grandmother's small living room in Atlanta, Keisha felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because the fight was over, it would never truly be over, but because she knew, deep in her bones, that she'd made the right choice. Some costs were worth paying. Some battles had to be fought, regardless of the personal toll. Because the alternative, silence, acceptance, complicity, was a cost she couldn't bear. 2 years after the video that changed everything, Keisha Williams walked across the stage at Northwestern University's commencement ceremony to receive her Bachelor of Science in Engineering. She'd made it, despite everything, the lawsuit, the media circus, the death threats, the sleepless nights. She'd finished her degree, not with the 4.0 she dreamed of as a freshman, but with a 3.4 GPA that represented something more valuable than perfect grades: resilience. Her family filled an entire row in the audience. Her grandmother, now 82, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Her mother beamed with pride. Her father, who'd found a better job after quitting the old one, recorded every second on his phone. Marcus, now 16, wore a shirt that read, "That's my sister," with an arrow pointing up. But Keisha wasn't just graduating. She was embarking on something bigger. The scholarship fund established by the American Airlines settlement, $25 million for Black students pursuing careers in aviation and transportation, had inspired her. If systemic change required diverse voices in positions of power, then she needed to help create those pathways. In her senior year, Keisha had founded the Civil Rights in Transportation Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to monitoring airline compliance with Keisha's law, providing legal support to passengers experiencing discrimination, and creating mentorship programs for young people of color interested in aviation careers. The organization had received funding from foundations, individual donors, and, ironically, from American Airlines itself, which was now trying to rehabilitate its image by supporting exactly the kind of oversight it had once fought against. Keisha had recruited a board of directors that included civil rights attorneys, former airline executives committed to reform, academics studying algorithmic bias, and passengers who'd been part of the class action lawsuit. Simone Harris, now semi-retired, served as the board chair. The initiative's first major project was launching a mobile app called TravelSafe that allowed passengers to document interactions with airline employees, automatically timestamp and geolocate incidents, and instantly connect with legal resources if needed. Within 6 months of launch, it had been downloaded 2.3 million times. The app had already led to accountability in 17 separate incidents across multiple airlines. Gate agents knew they were being watched now. The power dynamic had shifted, even if just slightly. Keisha had also become a sought-after speaker. She delivered talks at dozens of universities, corporations, and conferences about algorithmic bias, corporate accountability, and the intersection of technology and civil rights. At a TED Talk in Vancouver, she'd said something that went viral again. People ask me if I'm angry, if I'm bitter about what happened. And here's the truth. I'm not angry that one gate agent was racist. I'm angry that 17 complaints before mine weren't enough. I'm angry that it took a viral video for people to care. I'm angry that we live in a world where Black people have to document our own dehumanization just to be believed. But anger isn't enough. Anger without action is just noise, so I chose to channel that anger into building something that lasts. The clip had been viewed 12 million times. It was shown in diversity training sessions at Fortune 500 companies, in college classrooms, in church basements, and community centers. Keisha had become a voice for a generation tired of asking politely for equality and ready to demand it. But she was careful not to let the platform consume her identity. She was still Keisha, still the girl who loved terrible reality TV, who called her grandmother every Sunday, who went to brunch with friends, who sometimes just wanted to be normal. She'd started dating again, a fellow engineering student named James who'd stood by her through everything, who saw her as a person first and an activist second, who made her laugh until her stomach hurt. She'd reconnected with some of the friendships that had fractured, though others remained broken. That was okay. She'd learned that not everyone was meant to walk the entire journey with you. She'd also learned to set boundaries, to say no to interview requests when she was exhausted, to log off social media when the trolls got too loud, to prioritize her mental health, her relationships, her joy. Because justice work couldn't be sustained on anger alone. It required rest, it required community. It required remembering what you were fighting for. On a crisp fall morning in October 2026, 3 years and 1 month after the incident, Keisha found herself back at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. This time she wasn't traveling. She was there for an unveiling ceremony. American Airlines, as part of the settlement's ongoing requirements, had agreed to create permanent installations at major airports acknowledging the history of discrimination in air travel and committing to change. The installation at O'Hare was a wall of glass panels etched with the names of passengers who'd experienced discrimination, not just at American Airlines, but across the industry. Thousands of names representing decades of humiliation, harm, and exclusion. At the center was a plaque that read, "In recognition of every passenger denied dignity, in honor of those who demanded accountability, in commitment to a future where all travelers are treated with equal respect, we remember, we acknowledge, we commit to doing better." American Airlines, 2,026 inches. Keisha stood before it, running her fingers over the etched glass. Her name wasn't on the wall. She'd insisted it not be. This wasn't about her. It was about everyone who'd come before and everyone who'd come after. Jennifer Schultz's name wasn't on the wall either. The memorial wasn't about blaming individuals. It was about acknowledging systemic failure and pledging to dismantle it. A gate agent, A young black woman who couldn't have been more than 25 approached Keisha nervously. Miss Williams? I just wanted to say, I work here because of you, because of what you did. I saw your video when I was in college, and I decided I wanted to be part of making airlines better. I wanted to be the person who treats passengers the way they deserve. Keisha smiled, tears pricking her eyes. What's your name? Destiny Clark. Destiny, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing this work. The industry needs people like you. They hugged. Two black women in an airport where 3 years earlier, one black girl had been dehumanized. But things were different now. Not perfect, never perfect. Discrimination still happened. Keisha's law hadn't eliminated racism from air travel any more than the Civil Rights Act had eliminated racism from America. But there were structures in place now, accountability mechanisms, ways to fight back that didn't require going viral first. Black passengers filed complaints through the independent civil rights offices and saw actual investigations, actual consequences. The quarterly transparency reports showed improvements, not dramatic, but measurable. Complaints had decreased by 34% in the 2 years since implementation. Disciplinary actions for verified discrimination had increased by 300%. Numbers couldn't capture the full picture, but they mattered. They represented real people who'd been spared the humiliation Keisha had endured. That evening, Keisha had dinner with her family at her grandmother's house, the same house where she'd broken down crying 2 years earlier, the same house where Sunday dinners had always meant love and safety. Her grandmother had made her famous peach cobbler, the one they'd missed on that birthday 3 years ago. Make a wish, baby, her grandmother said, lighting candles on top of the cobbler. Not for a birthday, just because. Keisha closed her eyes. She didn't wish for fame or fortune. She didn't wish for the pain of the past 3 years to disappear. That pain had shaped her, taught her, made her who she was. She wished for continued progress, for more destinies choosing to work in airlines, for fewer passengers having to document their own mistreatment, for a world where her little brother's children wouldn't know the fear of flying while black. She wished for a future where her story was remembered not because discrimination in air travel was shocking, but because it had become unthinkable. She blew out the candles. Around the table, her family clapped and laughed. Marcus stole a corner of the cobbler before it was cut. Her mother scolded him playfully. Her father told a terrible joke that made everyone groan. It was normal, beautifully, wonderfully normal. And in that moment, Keisha realized something profound. She'd won. Not because she'd changed every heart or fixed every system. Not because racism was defeated or justice fully achieved. But because she'd refused to let hatred have the last word. She transformed trauma into action, pain into purpose, one humiliating moment into a movement that would outlive her. She'd turned that 5-minute video into legislation, education, and inspiration for thousands of people fighting their own battles. She'd proven that one person speaking truth, with courage, with receipts, with refusal to be silent, could shift the trajectory of an entire industry. Years later, when students would study the early 2020s civil rights movement in their history classes, they'd learn about Keisha Williams. They'd watch that video, the one with 80 million cumulative views, and see a young black woman standing at an airline gate, documenting injustice with steady hands and a clear voice. They'd learn about how one passport thrown in the trash became a catalyst for change. They'd study Keisha's law alongside other landmark civil rights legislation, understanding it as part of America's long, ongoing struggle to live up to its promises of equality. But they'd also learned that Keisha didn't do it alone, that behind every movement was a community, lawyers working for justice, journalists exposing truth, ordinary people sharing stories, politicians finding courage, and previous generations whose sacrifices made new progress possible. They'd learned that change was never one moment, one person, one video. It was thousands of small resistances accumulated over time, building pressure until the dam finally broke. And they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that justice doesn't wait for permission. It requires ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by refusing to accept the unacceptable. Keisha Williams was 22 years old when she changed an industry. She'd be the first to tell you she didn't do it alone. Nezu. But she'd also tell you this: when you see injustice, document it. When you have a platform, use it. When you're offered silence in exchange for money, choose your voice. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes one person's refusal to stay quiet becomes everyone's permission to speak up. Sometimes justice begins with a 19-year-old girl at a gate, a phone in her hand, and 5 words: "I'm recording all of this." And everything that comes after starts there.